So you just flew back yesterday from somewhere?
Baltimore.
Oh, cool. Nice.
On
Yes.
time.
I'm a little nervous about this. It'll be fun though.
Hope it'll go well. Hope they've got the glitches worked out.
Awesome. Look at all these people coming in here. Hi, everyone.
100. Welcome, guys.
Nice.
If you're in the room already, if you don't mind throwing in what state, tribe, or territory you're from, we can see what our audience looks like today, or where, at least where you're from. Oklahoma, Ohio, Tennessee, another Ohio. Wow, they're from everywhere.
Oh, woo. All
Wow,
right.
nice. I've seen Maryland a couple times, another Oklahoma, another Ohio. Ohio is popular today.
Nice. Ooh, look at my fellow Floridians. Several of them.
Oh, I saw a couple familiar names.
Awesome.
Welcome, everyone. We'll give it about, I don't know, another 30 seconds, see where we're at.
Yep, they're popping in. I feel like it's weird because it's like, seems like it's like overly hot everywhere. Right? The whole country is like on fire.
Anybody having good weather? Not here.
Not here. I had no power here in Florida, where I'm an hour north of Tampa, for 10 hours last night. It was getting real hot. Came on right at midnight.
Wisconsin, we need to be in Wisconsin. They said it's cool there.
Oh, good. I'm going there next week. Fun.
Well, our numbers seem to be slowing down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. We're excited to see you here. Today's webinar, if you're in the right place, enhancing your diligent recruitment through foster, adoptive, and kinship parent support. I'm Pamela Robbins from the National Center for Diligent Recruitment, and joining to me today is Barb Clark. Barb, anything you want to do? Introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, my name is Barb Clark. I live an hour north of Tampa. As I said, I'm the director of training at Families Rising, and which formerly known as NACAC, the North American Council on Adoptable Children. I don't know how long we have to say that, but for quite a while still. But and I have 5 young adult children, all through adoption or kinship care, and I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Excited to have you here. I've known Barb for many years. I've known NACAC since the 90s, so I'm like, that's a really hard transition for me.
Yeah, it is.
We have some teammates behind the scenes as well, so if a strange voice pops in, they're one of us. Let's move to the next slide, Adam. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared on the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. Your questions and interactions throughout today's webinar can be submitted via chat, like you've submitted your locations. At times, we might ask you to answer particular questions, and we hope to leave time at the end of today's presentation for any other questions that you may have. Shortly after today's webinar, you'll receive a survey. Please take the time to fill out that survey. Your input is valuable to us, and it provides us information about our continual improvement. In the next few days, you'll receive an email containing a link to the recorded version of this webinar, as well as your certificate of attendance. Next slide, please. The National Center for Diligent Recruitment is a service of the U.S. Children's Bureau with a mission to increase the capacity of states, tribes, and territories to collect and analyze data to guide targeted recruitment. The center provides on-site technical assistance to support diligent recruitment planning. Next slide, please. The center develops effective models of diligent recruitment based on research, as well as furthering the evidence base of family finding, relative outreach, reunion support, and intensive recruitment and retention services. Next slide, please. Today, our goals for today's presentation are the following: to identify the positive outcomes of retention and development of adoptive, foster, and kinship families, to recognize practices of current practices that may be disruptive of retention and support, to understand the importance of data when developing or enhancing your support programs, and to look at developing practices that are family focused. Before we jump in today's presentation, I'm going to have Adam pop up a poll. To your best of your knowledge, estimate. This you may or may not know. There's also a we do not track message, but just what are your turnover rates that you're currently experiencing for foster parents, if you know?
I'm really curious to hear the results on this.
And Adam, you can go to the next slide while we're waiting on that. I can't see the numbers voting. So when you guys see that it's getting close, we'll end it. If somebody could help me, that can see the voting.
Is it working for people? Normally we can see it.
Is the poll
Put in
working?
the
That's a
chat. Are
good
you able to
question.
put something? Are you guys able to use the poll? Okay, good.
Yes,
Just
perfect.
making sure.
We just can't see if you. I just can't see if you voted. I'll give it 10 more seconds. Okay, let's look at the results. Oh, our majority is we're not sure, we're not tracking. Now I wish I'd separated those two out because I'm like,
Yep.
okay.
Interesting.
This kind of looks like the research I looked at to find to prepare for today. It was all over the map. Interesting. If you don't mind putting in, if you answered D in the chat box, how many of you are unsure and how many of you are not tracking? Interesting.
I'm curious too, like how this compares to like 10 years ago.
I know, right? I know.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to know before I get this started that you'll hear me, first of all, the two research pieces that we leaned on heavily are focused just on foster parents. And sometimes during the presentation, you might hear me just say foster kinship, but just know that the customer service models and the support strategies that we are going to talk about today will apply broadly to include foster parents and others that we might serve and collaborate with. So what I found when we prepared for today was that the research was all over the map. It's a bit inconsistent, but found two large studies that both hit this mark of about 30 to 50%. One study in particular was delivered to 2,400 families that had recently closed licenses. And they got a little over 600 responses. And nearly 50% of those families cited lack of support as a reason for closure. Other key factors noted communication issues and lack of respect. Our goal for, and I will share some of those studies today as well. I saw that question pop up. Our goal for increasing retention rates is to have the opportunity to develop our families' skills and to meet the needs of children and youth in our care. And I think I skipped over the fact that there was 30 to 50% in two of the studies that I saw. Let's take a look at how our support is foundational to the outcomes of youth. Next slide, please. We as child welfare professionals are the foundation that provides the base. Support starts at the bottom and moves up to the children and youth that we serve. Our adoptive, foster, and kinship parents provide the safe and nurturing space for children who are experiencing trauma and loss. Without adequate support and resources, parents may find themselves overwhelmed and struggling to provide the care that youth and children need. Our support is vital for the best possible outcomes for children and youth. Next slide, please. Effective support requires a data-driven approach to understand the needs, challenges, and experiences accurately. There are many types of data we can collect as part of our process. Demographic information can be gathered about the youth and children, so we clearly understand who they are and what their needs are. Then comparing this to the demographics of our parents will help us identify gaps that need to be addressed. Knowing not only what support services exist, but data around the utilization of those services can provide more insight of needs. A variety of collection methods can provide diverse sets of data points. Consider utilizing surveys and questions. As well, focus groups and interviews can provide a rich set of qualitative data. Tracking system utilization and case reviews may also provide additional insight. Use your data to drive solutions. Look for patterns and trends to identify service gaps, as well as equity and disparity issues. Data not only guides the development and implementation processes, but will also guide continuous improvement of your service plan. Next slide, please. In the paper, Improving Relationships in Child Welfare Practice, Perspectives of Foster Care Providers, 630 parents offered their suggestions to enhance relationships between the parents and child welfare agencies. These suggestions aligned with the 4 categories listed on the slide. 1, challenges of the child welfare workforce. The second, the need for improved communication. The desire for enhanced teamwork, and the importance of support. Let's take a look at each of these categories to explore how to incorporate these suggestions into your diligent recruitment plan. Next slide, please. Parents, like those of us working in the child welfare system, see the challenges outlined on this slide. Working within a crisis-driven system, much of the time with high caseloads and limited resources, can take a toll on the emotional and mental well-being of our staff. The result is burnout and compassion fatigue, leading to high turnover rates. This in turn affects our ability to provide support to those caring for our most vulnerable children and youth. Although there's no simple answers, let's look at some possible ways we can mitigate some of these challenges. Next slide, please. First, we must prioritize training and support of our child welfare professionals. Their confidence and effectiveness can be enhanced by equipping them with knowledge, skills, resources that they need, which can in turn improve staff turnover rates. To alleviate the mental and emotional well-being on your staff, please promote work-life balance. Think of things you can do to promote that. Can you offer flexible scheduling options? What support services are available to your staff? Who and where can they reach out to when they need support? Are you actively collecting staff feedback to form data-driven decisions about their needs? Perhaps you're someone that's in a position to advocate for policy and practice change. Consider are caseloads routinely assessed and adjusted as needed? Are some of the processes that you use, could they be streamlined for efficiency? Again, are the voices of your staff being included in these considerations for change? Consider how community partnerships could benefit and support your staff. Could you partner with mental health professionals in your area who might be able to provide support groups for your professionals? One agency had reported that they brought in instructors monthly or bi-weekly, I can't remember which was, that taught classes to their staff on meditation, yoga, and other kind of similar self-help programming that helped with relaxation. Reach out possibly to local businesses. Maybe they might be willing to provide staff lunch once a month to show their appreciation for their work. Just finding those little things that make them feel better about what they're doing and where they work. The Children's Bureau also supports many national programs which provide training and technical assistance that could benefit workforce challenges as well. Kimberly will put these in the chat for us. There's the Center for Workforce Equity and Leadership, the National Adoption Competency Mental Health Training Initiative, and our work at the National Center for Diligent Recruitment, which provides a repository of resources and information, as well as technical assistance. Next slide, please. Although the main focus of today's webinar is on the support of adoptive, foster, and kinship parents, we cannot minimize the importance of supporting our child welfare professionals. It is through this chain of support that our children and youth are best served. Each of us plays a vital role in the partnership and contributes to the overall success. The benefits of mitigating workforce challenges could include enhancing the well-being and job satisfaction among child welfare professionals, which in turn can increase our retention rate of child welfare professionals. It will also improve the quality of care for children and youth we serve, and strengthen support networks and partnerships within the child welfare community. I'll ask you guys, if you have things that you've done in your agency that have helped with workforce issues that have been successful, please take a moment to share those in the chat with your colleagues. We can all learn from each other. So if you've had some success in this area, maybe pop those ideas into the chat box. Adam, you can go to the next slide. I'm waiting for those ideas to roll in too. Maybe it's an issue for all of us. Okay, we'll move to communication strategies. Feel free, thank you. Feel free to go ahead and add those tips into the chat though while I go on. So some suggested strategies for communication include defining clear channels and protocols for communication between child welfare staff and foster and kinship parents, including regular meetings, phone calls, emails, and written updates. So do you have written protocols in place for responsiveness? Do you have established timelines to respond to emails, calls, as well as sharing important information? It is important that we have clear expectations for our staff, and you might try encouraging staff to schedule dedicated time for communication to reduce gaps and decrease frustration. Think about your after-hours support. How is that handled? Is the staff that's taking those calls known to families? Having a warm voice on the other end of the line is important, but even more critical is having someone who's familiar to your families, who understands their needs, and has the expertise to provide necessary supports. Ensure that your foster, kinship, and adoptive families receive timely and transparent information about the children in their care, including case plan updates, medical information, and educational needs. Provide training to child welfare staff on effective communication skills, cultural competency, and trauma-informed care to better engage foster, adoptive, and kinship families. Consider the diversity of your staff, additionally addressing cultural and language needs of your families. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat box. Encourage child welfare staff to actively listen to the concerns, needs, and perspectives of parents without judgment or interruption. Build communication strategies and active listening into your ongoing training, coaching, and supervision. Don't just make it part of the onboarding process. Create opportunities for foster and kinship adoptive families to connect with each other and share experiences, challenges, and resources in a supportive environment. And Barb will talk more about support in her section as well. Provide regular avenues for feedback. Assure that these are accessible and equitable. Building intentional, explicit communication strategies can have many benefits, including increasing trust and collaboration between child welfare staff and foster and adoptive kinship parents, increasing the satisfaction and retention rates among your foster, kinship, and adoptive parents, which can improve placement stability and the well-being of children in your care, and greater efficiency and effectiveness in providing services and supports. By implementing strategies to improve communication between child welfare staff and foster adoptive kinship parents, we can strengthen partnerships and create a more supportive and responsive child welfare system that prioritizes the needs of children and families. Again, I would ask you if you have any great tips of how you've increased or enhanced your communication between parents and staff. Please share those tips in the chat box with your colleagues. And Adam, you can move to the next slide. which I think I skipped ahead to. No, didn't. Okay. I did. I think I read the notes for this slide on my last one. Or did I not? Or I show I'm ready for enhanced teamwork. Can we go to the next slide? Collaborative relationships between child welfare professionals and foster, adoptive, and kinship parents are essential for providing optimal care and support to children. Building a sense of community fosters a shared commitment to the well-being of children and strengthens the overall child welfare system. In our pre-service work with families, we emphasize their importance as part of the team supporting children. Yet a common thread I've heard in parent support groups is this feeling that sometimes is their voice not only unheard, but it's unwelcomed. Having a sense of not being valued and respected for their contribution, parents become discouraged and dissatisfied. This in turn contributes to our decreased retention, which in turn impacts the outcomes of our children and youth. Another common theme among families is a feeling of isolation. Parenting youth and children who have experienced trauma and loss can be really challenging. They often feel judged and misunderstood by members of their own community, even sometimes by members of their own family. How do we, as child welfare professionals, demonstrate and communicate their value? We may be the only voices that are lifting them. As you look to improve the sense of teamwork between your agency and families, consider this. Is the experience of our foster, adoptive, and kinship parents being considered when crafting policy and practice? Are our protocols family-friendly and inclusive? Let's look at some strategies for enhanced teamwork. Next slide, please. Collaborative teamwork takes intentional, mindful, and reflective measures. It's a vast topic that we're just covering at a very high level today. A few key points listed on this slide have been covered in our conversation today, such as clear communication channels. But let's think of some other strategies that might build a sense of teamwork and community, such as, again, I've mentioned, including parents' perspective, including their perspective in meetings and any other important decision-making points. Encourage their participation and provide adequate notice of meetings and court dates. To build a larger sense of community and belonging, hold social events and other opportunities for authentic engagement and connection. Celebrate successes with your family, such as celebrating reunifications or milestones of youth and family members. Parents need to know they are valued and respected. How are you communicating value and respect? But more importantly, how are you demonstrating it? Reflect on how you engage families as a community. Relationship building is intentional. Listen to the needs of your families and create opportunities to meet those needs in safe spaces. Actively seek their participation and engagement. When developing policy and practice, are the voices and experiences of families and parents being considered? Advocate for the inclusion of youth and parents in focus groups when drafting new policies and procedures. Supported parents create strong families. The energy and commitment you direct to enhance teamwork and community can provide benefits that include placement stability, satisfaction and retention of parents, increased collaboration and effectiveness in services, and a sense of community and belonging. Ultimately, the youth and children we serve are the beneficiaries of this intentional focus. Now I'm going to hand off to Barb for the support piece. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, thank you. Okay, so the next slide is going to talk about training and educate the different kind of supports, right? So there's lots of ways that we can support families. Training and education obviously is one, and that's something that I'm super passionate about because training is my jam and what I love to do. And I would, if I could cancel all my meetings and emails and inbox and just sit and train all day, I'd be the happiest person in the world. But anyways, and the reason for that is because for me, as one of the parents that we're working with, when I didn't know how to parent my kids effectively, it was horrific. Our family was a hot mess. And so training and education is so important, but also coaching and mentoring. That is my new personal passion. I actually have this morning, I did two different one-on-one coaching sessions with families in two different states. At Families Rising, we do coaching with families, like 10 or 20 different sessions sometimes that their county or state will sign up and pay for. And it's powerful stuff. And I had a family say this to me several years ago that I was working with in the state of Minnesota when I lived there. And they said to me, Barb, I've read the books, I've gone to your trainings and other people's trainings, I've been trained in Beyond Consequences, but in the moment when my brain is on fire and we are in crisis, I need somebody to help walk me through this crisis. And that was powerful for me to hear, because sometimes I get really frustrated. I'm like, oh my gosh, I train these people and they're still doing this wrong. So coaching and mentoring ongoing is really important. And not every family is going to need that level, but a lot of them do need that. Resource connection and navigation is another really important support. We all know this. Our systems of care are really screwed up and confusing. We in the system are confused. We struggle with the acronyms and all of that insider stuff. And it is really challenging for your average layperson to understand our systems. And not only is it our system within child welfare that they have to figure out, but then they have to figure out often the school systems, because so many of our kids need more intensive supports. They have to figure out maybe the mental health case management system. There's all of these systems, and that is confusing and a really important support. Connections to peer support opportunities. Pam mentioned that, how important it is to get these families connected with other caregivers who are parenting and caring for children and adolescents with similarities, right? Obviously, no two kids are ever the same, but we know that kids who've experienced trauma function very differently than other children. And so we've got to get them connected so that they don't feel so isolated. Cultural competency and connection is a really, really important one as well. We know that often we have families who are parenting children from different cultures, different races, different religions from them. And that is something we are hearing from the lived experts, right? The people that spent time in foster care or were adopted. That is a ginormous hole that the majority of them are reporting to us when we work with them now, is that the majority of families are not prepared in that area. So that's a crucial one. And then respite too. Respite is a form of post-placement, post-adoption support, right? We often say post-adoption support, but I like to use the term post-placement because foster families need support as well. And so respite, we refer to it as a unicorn. Is it real? Is it a real thing? But that's a huge support for many of our families. Go on to the next slide, please. But the most important support, in my opinion, is preparing these families on how to parent these kiddos differently. Most of us that work in the field or are adoptive, foster, or kinship parents have gone through that extreme phase of realizing, wow, traditional parenting strategies don't work great with kids who have brains that were impacted by trauma. Using consequences and punishments and things like that don't usually work really effectively with a lot of our kids. It works for some of them, but the majority of them it doesn't. And if we don't, in our systems in our child welfare systems, if we are not preparing these families properly before they have children placed with them, and or supporting them in this area after the kids have been placed, we are causing further trauma to the kids. I'm just going to say that. Like my husband and I caused trauma to our children by using traditional parenting strategies. And no parent or caregiver and no child welfare professional ever goes into this field to harm children, right? Like we need to take the oath, right? The do no harm, just like medical students do. We are doing harm by not teaching them the right strategies of how to parent these kids. So that is what I'm super passionate about. We have a great training that we call the Big Three: Raging, Lying, and Stealing at Families Rising, that we're happy to do for any organization that will get parents beyond using those traditional strategies. All right, next slide. So we also then, looking at supporting support, if we provide post-placement supports for our families, recruitment and retention is going to increase. Our families talk to each other, right? They have neighbors, they have members in their faith-based organizations, they have colleagues, they have extended family, they have good friends who, if they see and hear our families struggling with these hard behaviors and the stuff, and they're not getting the right supports from us in the system, that word spreads. And no, and I've had many people say to me, oh yeah, I've thought many times about doing foster care, but I had a neighbor who was doing it and I saw them going through horrific times and things like that. And I just don't think I can do that, right? And so if we support those families, we are organically going to have better recruitment and retention. I think literally it is the number one thing that is going to help with recruitment and retention is supporting the current families because the word spreads. And research shows even that when foster parents, for example, feel supported, that they are more likely to continue fostering. And as Pam also mentioned, that relationship that they have with their licensing worker, with their workers within the system, also plays heavily into their likelihood to continue with fostering or not. And so, the other thing we have to do too is we have so many families. A lot of the reasons why families are exiting foster care is because of some of the big behaviors that these kids are having and struggling with how to handle some of those really big behaviors. And that's just another reason why we've got to do the right training and support for those families, because they're more likely to stick with it if we've done that. Next. So those post-placement supports, again, it's crucial that we've got to do it all along. Before we have the child even placed with that family, we've got to be providing them with a ton of support. We can go to the next slide. It is so important. Resource navigation. I remember once calling my county in Hennepin County in Minnesota, where I used to live in Minneapolis. There was the front door is what they called it. It was a phone number. I can tell you the number, 348-4111, right? Like I have it memorized. And this is the number that you're supposed to call when you feel like you need help, if you need an assessment, if you need supports. The first time I called that, I hung up and I cried. The lady that I dealt with that day was not very helpful. She was pretty rude, as a matter of fact. And that is not like me. I am not the kind of person who cries often, and I don't have any problem with crying. That's just not in my nature. And I felt defeated. 2 weeks later, I pulled my pants back on and I called again, and I got a different person who was super helpful, right? And in the post-placement support that I've been doing for years through Families Rising, one of the most important things that I do is help families to navigate the systems. And again, so that was in Minnesota. In Minnesota, Families Rising has a contract with the state to do post adoption and post-placement supports. And so we would help families, we still have staff there that do that. I do a few hours of it still, but we help them navigate what is a waiver and how does the waiver system work in that state, for example, because as we all know, it's different in every single state and territory and tribe. And so what are the assessments to get in the door? What is the difference between developmental disability supports as opposed to children's mental health supports, right? All of those things are really important to help these families navigate, because it's going to make these children more successful if they have the right supports around them, right? My most challenging daughter turns 25 in a week, and she is really fantastic, but really challenging and hard. And she is thriving right now because she finally, for the last 2.5 years, has the exact right supports around her of what she needs. And so when we help families navigate these resources and get the right supports, our kids do better. And that is all of our goal, right? The well-being of children is why we do what we do. And so, so that is really important that we're thinking about those things and how to help them navigate that. In many of the states, territories, tribes, there's it doesn't mean that you as the worker have to be knowledgeable in all of these resources and supports. That's not realistic. But there are agencies and organizations within all of your areas that probably are or do have those knowledge, right? There's most areas have an ARC, an ARC, which is an advocacy organization around disabilities. And they usually are generally very, very knowledgeable in the resources and supports in that local area. Every single state and tribe and territory has a federally funded special ed or school information resource center that can help families navigate IEPs, 504s, things like that, right? So that is an organization you need to be familiar with in your area and connect families with. So we've got to, that is what in Families Rising, in our post-placement support program, we spend a ton of time training our staff in how to help families navigate these systems of care, because I literally also remember sitting on the deck at our house in Minneapolis once with paperwork. I was sitting on the ground. I had piles of paperwork around me, and I was on the phone with one of the hospital systems trying to navigate, just understanding all of these ridiculous bills and all of these things that I had that I couldn't figure out. I mean, we know this in child welfare, the amount of paperwork you all are doing is pretty significant, right? Completely understand that. These families are doing that for usually more than one kid, right? A lot of our families, especially foster families, end up having, I don't even know, Pam, do you know what the average number of kids there are in generally, I think it's usually 4 or 5 usually kids are usually in foster families, and some of them we know have way more than that. In general, biological families, we're seeing 2 to 3 usually being the max. Obviously, there's many that don't fit into that, but that's a hard one, right? I have 5 neurodivergent kids, and I have 5 ginormous files of paperwork, and navigating that paperwork alone put me on the edge of the cliff a bazillion times, and it still does, because it doesn't end when they turn 18. My kids are 21, 22, 23, 24, and 24. And I am still more involved than I would be if they were more neurotypical and didn't have trauma histories. I know for a lot of our emerging adults, caregivers are still more highly involved and heavily involved in those early years, right? Like 30, 40, 50 years ago when you turned 18, you left the home and you were kind of on your own. And it's not that way anymore in today's world. And so just helping them to all navigate these resources, it is huge, because literally there were so many times where I was brought more to tears by paperwork and stress with navigating systems of care than I was with dealing with extremely hard behaviors. And that should not be that way, right? Because that is something that is a problem that we as a system and as professionals can solve and help these families to navigate. And so we actually I have a webinar I've created on helping families manage paperwork and logistics, with some tips, right, on different apps to use and different ways of, and nowadays, like, we use the Google Drive. I'm like, you scan everything and you put it in the Google Drive and have a folder, or an iCloud, whatever it is. There's these ways that we can help families to be more efficient with managing the paperwork and all of that junk. And I'm using appropriate language today, so be impressed. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, please. Peer-to-peer support. Okay, so this is my baby, my passion. So again, my kids are fantastic and really hard, right? Most of them are pretty hard, and one of them is super hard. And I tell you what, I was reaching out to every professional I could, like doctors, neuropsychologists, therapists, teachers, social workers, experts in the field, begging for help, begging for advice. And most of the advice, the majority of the advice I was getting from them was stuff they learned in manuals and textbooks and webinars that trainings they had gone to. and that were not actually super helpful. Some of the stuff was helpful. I'm not saying this to trash on professionals by any means, but it really wasn't until I started to connect with other foster, adoptive, and kinship parents that I really started to learn that I needed to do things differently. And I needed to learn from them and their wisdom and their experience and things like that. And so, support groups are great. Coaching is great, whether it's group coaching or one-on-one coaching. As I said, we at Families Rising do one-on-one coaching with families. And sometimes that might just be, sometimes we have a county or a state or a tribe that is connecting with us and saying, hey, could you just meet like 2 or 3 times with this family and to get them through over this hump that they're in. But sometimes it might be 10 or 20 or ongoing coaching sessions that we're doing with the families because support groups aren't the right fit for everybody, right? It's just not. And not every support group is built equally, right? There are unfortunately, some cruddy support groups out there. At Families Rising, we also have a parent leadership training where we train caregivers to lead support groups for each other. But some people, even if it is a good support group, it just isn't the right fit for them because sitting in that group is just too stressful, whether it's virtual or in person. It just isn't going to be the right fit because we all have different learning styles, right? Some people are more auditory learners, some people are more visual learners. We learn differently, and for some, doing it in a group isn't going to work. So those are really, really important things. I will never forget the moment with that family I mentioned earlier that said to me, I've been to your trainings, I've read the books, but I need somebody to help me through things in the moment. I worked really closely with that family for almost 7 years. And finally, and trying to get them to use a more connected relational style of parenting, they kind of had a very rigid very rigid anal approach with their kids, and it wasn't working. And finally, 6 or 7 years later, I finally was able to get them to shift. And now for many years now, they've been doing the more connected relational parenting. And every single time I've been able to get a family to shift to that type of parenting, they've never gone back. I mean, your brain always goes back to it, right? Because we're wired naturally to like think consequence and punitive based. But so we're going to slip sometimes, but they always will say to me after several months of doing it, oh my gosh, I'm never going back to that other way of doing it. All right, next slide. Okay, so the other thing too with the post-placement support is it minimizes the feelings of isolation. Holy cow, there are not too many things that are more isolating than parenting kids with really hard behaviors, because you get all of this cruddy advice from everybody from the extended family, from the neighbors, from your faith-based, people that you're in faith with, from the professionals, all of these people, you feel like you are a lunatic. This is how I felt for so many years. And again, it wasn't until I got connected with the greater community that I realized, oh, okay, this isn't just me. I am not the problem. I've been trying this for years and this didn't work. And this is what these people are experiencing. And it just makes a huge change, right? We've got a quote up here from a foster parent saying, initially, I was skeptical about joining this support group. I thought that joining would reinforce that we are not a normal quote unquote family. But I have learned through this group that sometimes our issues aren't as bad as they seem on the surface. And when our issues are bad, it's nice to know that someone else has been there and dealt with the same or similar things. I work in a group coaching program that's specific to fetal alcohol spectrum disorders outside of my work at Families Rising. And we will have 20 to 50 people on a group coaching call on Zoom. And when we'll have a caregiver sitting and saying, oh my gosh, here's what we're dealing with, and da-da-da, and you can hear that they're feeling isolated and like it's their fault or something. And I'll just do this quick. Okay, everybody raise your hand if you've ever had this happen, right? And literally almost every single hand goes up when we do that. We don't do it on every single person, but we do that often to be able to help a caregiver realize, what you are dealing with is hard and it's really hard, but it's not your fault. And this is a common thing for kids whose brains were compromised in the way that your kids' brains were compromised. So that isolation thing is so huge and really, really important that we help families to not feel so isolated. Okay, next slide, please. So what we also want to do is we also want to have mindful empathy, right? Here's the thing, you guys, all of you fabulous professionals on here, we need you. These adoptive, foster, and kinship parents need you. They need you on their team. They need a strong relationship with you. But we also need you to know what to say and what not to say, because that's one of the things that sometimes we have a tendency when we are on the phone with, or in person sitting there with a caregiver and they're telling you about all these wackadoozy behaviors that they're dealing with and seeing. Sometimes what we have a tendency to do, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to empathize with them, right? And what many workers will do is we'll try to kind of brush past it. Oh, yeah, my kid does that, or my kid used to do that, or something like that. And again, I understand that there's truth to that, right? But if your kids are neurotypical and not adopted or foster or kinship kids, it's different. It really, honest to goodness, is different. All kids are going to have certain behaviors, but the way that kids that have experienced trauma do some of those things, it is magnified like times a bazillion. And so, so sometimes when we're trying to empathize and we will say something like that to one of these families, it doesn't feel good. It just doesn't feel good. I understand why we're doing it, because we're trying to empathize and connect with them. But we just want to be mindful of some of those kind of things that we're saying. And, you know, one of the things, and most of y'all have probably heard this, one of the challenges or things that we hear a lot from when families are reaching out to a professional saying, here's what's going on. The example of suggesting a sticker chart, for example, is one that is going to make most of these families almost want to throat punch you, right? Because sticker charts in the token economy system are not very effective for the majority of kids who have experienced trauma. Now, it might work sometimes, so I don't want to slam them completely, but we just want to be mindful of some of those things that we're saying and doing. So that's something too. You can, even if you're sitting and talking with a family and maybe you say something that you think is showing empathy and maybe you can see their face kind of glaze over, stop and say, how did that sound to you? Did that sound supportive? I'm trying to be supportive right now, but I want you to tell me, did that sound supportive? See what they're going to say, right? Let's hear what they are feeling and thinking in those moments. So, we are going to share a brief little video here that is, Adam's going to get up here next for us. That is Brene Brown. I know most of us know and adore Brene Brown and her different books, but this is a really brief couple-minute video that talks a little bit about the difference between empathy and sympathy, and I think it's really powerful.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Yeah, I just think that's powerful to think about things. You know, what we really want to be, we can go to the next slide. What we really want to be doing is we want to be listening and then potentially connecting these families with the right resources. So if you have a family calling you up or sitting there in person or on Zoom or whatever it is and saying, "Oh my gosh, my kid goes to school, is totally fine at school all day, and then comes home and he's blowing up all night long, right? And it's all over the map." You know, oh my gosh, that sounds really hard. Because what, you know, like literally when we used to sit and say that to some of our workers and professionals, they would be like, you know, I honestly, it was one of the first times a sticker chart was suggested to me. It was a sticker chart, right? Or these different kind of and I'm not saying that you can't give families suggestions, because you can, but you just have to be mindful of, is it a suggestion that actually is one that is going to be helpful for this type of child and the way that their brain works? Because again, this trauma has such a huge impact on our kids' brains, and some of those traditional strategies just don't work. And so, so we want to really listen and empathize and be like, that is really hard. I also, this is what I have to do with my my 23-year-old daughter who has extreme depression and anxiety. I just listen to her, and I will say I used to give her suggestions all the time, which never really worked and was not helpful. And now I just say, "I'm so sorry you're feeling like that. Is there anything you want me to say or do? Do you want me to give strategies? You want me to give ideas, or do you just need me to listen?" Right? So even just saying that to one of our families, that sounds so hard. I can't even imagine. Do you want me to try to come up with some resources for you? Can I try to connect you with some other families who are dealing with similar things? What would feel good to you right now? That is so awesome. We had an in-home therapist that we started working with years ago, and she actually said at the end of our intake, she said, "You know, you guys are pretty savvy and know your stuff. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to help, but I really do want to try." And I was like, "Oh my God, I love you. Thank you." Because normally they'd be like, "Oh, we're going to do A, B, C, D, E, and everything is going to be great." And it was really actually helpful to hear from somebody that she didn't necessarily have an answer or a solution, but she was willing to try to help us fill our toolbox. So that's what I have, Pam. I don't know if you have anything to add or if we want to go to
That's great.
questions.
I am going to read, Kimberly shared something earlier in the chat in case you missed it. I'm going to put it back in there again, because we do have peer-to-peer groups for child welfare professionals that could help help us. We get together in smaller groups, and it's a more conversational round table kind of, you know, more interactive than our webinars and just professionals. So check that link out in the chat. I think this was really a great conversation. A good, like I said, we're kind of high level in some ways, but we have a few minutes left. If you have some questions, I do have a thought question for you when we're done, but we can take a couple questions in the meantime if somebody has any.
There's one in the chat. You want me to read it? Do you have suggestions
Sure.
when you are offering coaching and support group opportunities and have low attendance in parents interested in joining them? That's a common one. We have a lot of people who will set up the support groups, and people say they want the support groups and then nobody comes. So, so a couple of things around that. First of all, we do want to make sure we're doing the surveys and getting the information from the parents of like, when is it that they could attend? Is in person the best? We've got to have a variety. So, because as we know, people have different learning styles. So we want to have a virtual option. We want to have an in-person option. But the other thing we have to be really mindful of is you have to be super strategic in who is leading the groups. And what I've really found is that people who are really effective support group leaders have good attendance at their support groups. And so not always, but that makes a big difference. We have to make sure that at any kind of support group or coaching session that we also have some fun and that we laugh. Like laughing is crucial because we've all seen the Hollywood support groups in the movies and stuff like that, where you're sitting around and it's just the Debbie Downer thing and you're just sitting there talking about all the muck and all that stuff. And because of that, and or just talking about the huge big behaviors, right? I know a family that showed up to a support group once and then they left it halfway through and they were like, oh my gosh, that was scaring the crap out of me, right? Because so we have to be mindful of that too. We have to, like with the support groups, it's ideal if we can have one for people parenting adolescents and one for the people with the younger kid, right? So and that's what the parent leadership training that we have at Families Rising, we get into the weeds on that, on how to do support groups right. And we can also consult with groups and organizations on how to enhance current groups. But really, if we're leading them effectively and communicating right with families, I also recommend that we say to families, what is your preferred mode of reminders for a support group? Do you want an email, a text, a phone call, Facebook, post on Facebook group page, or, what is it? And for some of them, they might have 2 or 3. They might want it in every way. And what I found is if I emailed people the day before and an hour before, I had better attendance. So we've just got to be, there's lots of different things. That's a whole nother webinar.
And I think sometimes you look at people who you think have a huge level of expertise leading this, but sometimes people skills, the soft skills are probably more important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Any suggestions for working with families whose main motivation to foster was to adopt, as it is connected to home closing? Do you know, as it was connected to home closing? I'm not sure what that means. Do you know what that means?
I'm assuming that they didn't get the outcome they wanted, so they're closing. Is that what you mean, Carol? Yeah, that's a whole nother webinar.
Right? Yeah.
I think that's having very clear expectations up front about what our system is for, and that the goal of our system is reunification whenever humanly possible, and having those conversations.
Yeah, I think we have to do a better job of when we are doing licensing and training for foster families about talking about the shared parenting, the co-parenting, the reunification and the importance of that, and helping them to have the empathy for the first families, right? To help our families to understand. I just today saw a Facebook post from an adoptive parent just slamming on a first parent, and nothing drives me more nutty than that. And I had to sit and I actually put a reminder on my phone for an hour later to go and respond, because I was starting to respond and I wasn't being very nice. I was like, because it triggered me. So I think we just have to help the foster and adoptive families to come to this from a place of empathy too, and that has to be included in the training.
Yep. I have a question for the audience on our way out. We have about a minute and a half. In the chat box, list one action step you can take in the next week to improve your agency's parent support model. It can be tiny. One step you can take in the next week. Barb, I can see you want to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, while people are putting that in there, we could respond to this question. What are the 2 most important? Or no, wait, we'll just go. My chat box. Any suggestions? This is it. Any suggestions on how to combat child welfare staff damaging relationships with foster families? And again, I think a lot of that comes to helping, we also have to help our staff to understand the chaos that these families are living in. Like you guys, if you're not a foster or adoptive family, it is the weirdest life you've ever seen. The things that these kids will say and do would blow your mind. And some of you have probably seen it on some visits, but most of the time you don't see the real stuff. They can usually hold it together on a visitation or something like that. So we have to help our workers also come to a place of empathy, of understanding the chaos going on in these homes and how we need to better support these families to help them shift to those different kind of strategies is so important.
I love the suggestions that you've shared. And again, we'll try to comb through the chat and see if we can come up with a summarization that we can share. Okay. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. Please join us again. Sign up for the other things that we've mentioned in the chat. We'll welcome you back next time. It's great seeing everyone.
Thanks, everyone.